Unmute everybody. I'm just going to unmute you three. I mean, you two. Oh, actually, you're not. Wait. Oh, yeah. All right. I think we can let everybody in, whoever's doing that.
Should I? Oh, I don't think I can. Let's see. Should we bring them all in now?
You can let them in.
Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Hope you're all doing great. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the workshop. Welcome to our OGP 2024-25 application workshop, Organizational Grant Program, OGP application workshop. If you're not familiar with the program, we will be discussing helpful tips, a breakdown on the requirements, and a step-by-step overview of the application process for this program, which is a multi-year grant for arts and cultural organizations all over the County of Los Angeles. All right, so let's start with a land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants past, present, and emerging as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community, stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. We're dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments, including in no particular order, the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, Gabrieleño Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, Gabrieleño Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, Gabrieleño Band of Mission Indians Quiche Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. To learn more about the First Peoples of Los Angeles County, please visit the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission. The website is at lanaic.lacounty.gov. Okay. So thank you for being here. My name is Rosalind Escobar. I am the Grants Programs Manager for this program, the Organizational Grant Program. I'm joined by my colleagues, Julie Chavez and Ann Jensen, who are on the line with us and will be supporting us through this workshop. They will be monitoring the chat to ensure that we are able to address questions. They may, in some cases, ask you to unmute yourself. And in other cases where the question might be very specific to the organization's situation, we may ask that the person who's asking that question wait till the question and answer session at the end so that we can dive more into that particular question. So we'll go through this. We're going to try to get all this information completed, or try to finish this workshop up by 12:30. And then after that, we'll have a session for office hours, which will be like a group office hours where folks can kind of sit in the room, listen to questions that others might have. Hopefully we can get some more one-on-one time through the office hours. And basically you would just stay on the line here on this Zoom line to participate in that group office hours after this workshop is over. All right, so let's get into it. A little bit about the OGP program in case you're new to this, this particular grant. This is a grant that provides financial support to assist and strengthen nonprofit arts organizations who provide quality arts programming to enrich the lives of LA County residents. These are 2-year grants. It's project-based funding. There is a reimbursement that happens during the 2-year cycle. So basically you're spending money and we're reimbursing you for the money that you've spent. And then there is a cash match required. These grants are meant to boost capacity for organizations. They're really meant to support the organization to be able to increase the overall capacity of how they're doing business, how they're doing their programming. The project scope, we talk about a 2-year project scope, but it can be overarching. The funding is really meant to provide to fund whatever the biggest need of the organization is. So as you're thinking through what kind of request you want to propose, just remember that this is funding that's very flexible, and you can use it really in any way that you need to, and you just have to frame it as a 2-year project. There are some eligibility requirements with this grant. So I'm putting those here on the screen. And so this is a summary of what you'll want to make sure. If it's your very first time applying, you want to make sure you meet all these requirements. So number 1, the organizations who are eligible for this grant are organizations who have a 501c3 tax exempt status, or a comprehensive fiscal sponsorship agreement with a fiscal sponsor located in in the state of California. The principal offices of the organization who's doing the programming has to be in Los Angeles County. The primary mission of the organization has to be to provide arts programming. And 50% or more of the budget needs to be dedicated to arts programming and activities. There should be a functioning board of directors that meets regularly, and we need to make sure that there has been 2 years of programming that has happened consecutively over the last 2 years. So from 2021 to 2023 is what we're looking at. Virtual is okay for meeting that requirement. Organizations who are not eligible to apply would be organizations whose primary mission is actually to raise funds, not to produce programs or activities or exhibitions. So if your mission is really to raise funds for another organization is doing the programming, you wouldn't be eligible for this grant. Educational institutions like universities, schools, not eligible. Individual artists, not eligible for this grant. City, county departments, agencies, and their 501c3 or friends of partners, not eligible. If you're using a fiscal sponsor and your agreement is not a comprehensive comprehensive or a Model A agreement, most of the time these are Model C agreements. These are pre-approved grant relationships. Those are not eligible for this grant. Social service, religious, or welfare organizations, not eligible for this grant, but potentially eligible for a different grant called the Community Impact Arts Grant. If this sounds like your organization, you should connect with us. You probably don't need to sit through this workshop. You would want to attend the other workshop for the other program. So if that sounds like you can send a chat message to Ann Jensen, and she can send you a link for the CIAG workshop. The organizations who are not open to the public are also not eligible. And we've suspended one of our requirements here. We in prior years, in our eligibility requirements, we required that organizations not have a deficit of 20% or more over the last 2 years. We've temporarily suspended that. It will come back next year. So for those of you who are regular applicants to this program, you're going to see some updates in the guidelines. And so we've listed them here. For those of you who are new, this is all new. So just going over what's new in these guidelines for this year. We do update our guidelines every year. So for all applicants, the general updates are for, there's 3 that I'll go over. So one is that organizations who are providing virtual programming are eligible. So if you have been doing programming, but it hasn't been on site, it's okay. It meets the programming guidelines, as long as it's been happening from the last 2 years, 21 to 23. Organizations who have that accumulated deficit, again, that's not a problem for this grant cycle, but you're going to need to be careful for next cycle because that requirement will come back. So just an FYI that if you do have a 20% deficit, that's okay for this cycle. We're also going to be looking very closely at the OGP funder report. We're looking at the funder report. It's a requirement of the grant. It's an attachment that we're going to need you to attach. And just FYI, when we look at that funder report, which I'll go over in great detail, but when we look at that funder report, we're going to basically compare it to the 990 that you submit for the same year. And if the revenue line on your 990 is completely different or very different from your budget, your most recent budget in the funder report, that will be flagged and it will be an error on the application. So just be really careful with your funder report, because if there is a 10% or more variance in those 2 numbers, you will need to go back to SMU Data Arts and fix that error. Okay. And then update specific to fiscal sponsors who are applying on behalf of their organizations. So the 990 that you submit, the tax form, it needs to have a California address. If the address on the 990 is out of state, it will not be an eligible application. So this application is it's a big application. We're hoping that by looking at this checklist and just taking a look at what you're going to need to have ready to go before you even look at the online application, that it'll help you feel more organized, more prepared, and that that your application process will flow more smoothly. So we've listed here all the different attachments and documents you need to prepare beforehand. Okay, so that's what you're seeing here. There's 3 types. First category is the financials. So SMU Data Arts, it's a website that's you can find at www.culturaldata.org. That's going to be your very first step. You're going to go into culturaldata.org and you're going to complete 3 years of programming, marketing, financial, and administrative information. They're called cultural data profiles. If it's your very first time doing this, you're going to need to complete 3 years, the most recent 3 years of data. If you've only been around for 2 years, it would be 2. We will be looking at the funder reports to make sure there are 3 years. And if if your organization was founded in 2021, then we'll look for 2 years on that funder report. But basically, these cultural data profiles are like a summary of the last 3 years of information for the organization, and they are accessible to us as an OGP funder report, all of that data. If you're just continuing, you're just putting in the newest year of information. But like I said, if you're new, it'll take you a while. You're putting in 3 years. So you're going to need to complete that, download the Data Arts Funder report afterward. Make sure that you have a copy of your federal Form 990, 990EZ or 90N for the most recently completed fiscal year. Fiscally sponsored organizations will also need internal financials. And then if your budget is $2 million or more, you will also need a completed financial audit, so a copy of that audit. In addition to that, we also will need the Cultural Equity and Inclusion Statement, Policy, or Plan. A lot of you are probably returning applicants, and in that case, you may just reuse whatever document you submitted the last time. So if you already have something that you submitted already and you want to reuse it, that's totally fine. If you're brand new, you'll have to make sure you have this statement, policy, or plan ready to go, and the proof of the board adoption of that policy, plan, or statement. So two documents there. And then the last category is artistic documentation. So this would be video, PowerPoint, audio, published materials, or images of the work. And we do encourage that you submit 2 if possible. So there are some strict guidelines around what you can submit as an artistic sample. So make sure you take a look at those guidelines to make sure that you do submit the correct type of sample. All right, and then lastly, there are some supplemental materials that you can submit. There are, for some organizations who, for example, are arts education organizations, you may want to submit a curriculum sample. You may want to submit some letters of recommendation, reviews, or marketing materials. And these are considered optional. And sorry, this is very loud track. Okay. They're considered optional except for the arts education curriculum sample. For those who are arts education organizations, that sample may be required. So take a very close look at the guidelines to make sure you submit everything that is required. All right, so financial forms, you're seeing a list of all the items here. We kind of just went through this, so just a brief overview of these. The cultural data profiles need to be completed before you download a funder report. And the 990 needs to match that funder report. So whatever the final year on the funder report is, that's your most recently completed fiscal year, it will match the federal Form 990 most recently completed fiscal year. The end year of those documents should be either 2022 or 2023. In rare cases, you may be using a document from 2021. If that's the case, the end month can't be anything later than December. So December 2021 or anything after that. And so those requirements are true for all organizations. The organizations with a budget over $2 million have that third document that is required, which is the financial audit. Again, all 3 years should match whatever the end years are. So depending on your budget size, you can see what the requirement is here. And for the financial audit, we do accept anything later than June 2021. So if your audit ends, like if you're wanting to use something from 2021 and it ends in June 2021, that's okay. Anything after that is fine. Okay, so I'll stop here because I'm seeing some activity in the chat. So,
Hi,
and,
Ross.
oh, go
Oh,
ahead, Julie.
just a quick question. Let's see. What is not open to the, can you clarify what not open to the public means? This is coming from Brandon Roll.
So that would be like membership organizations. You do programming, but it's like at a country club. That's not open to the public. You're open, but you have to have a membership to participate. That's a really simple example.
Okay, I was just because what I was wondering about is like we have some programming that like only put the participants are able to come to, and then more public facing stuff. That's okay. You're not talking about events that are just for participants in a program.
No, 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 no. Yeah, if your programs are accessible to the public, like I can just go and find your website and RSVP to one of your events, then you should be fine. Anything else, Julie?
Anne answered this on the chat, but is there, just to clarify, the DEI statement and plan, is this considered the same as the CEII?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's a different way of saying it. So it's cultural equity and inclusion or diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah. Thanks, Julie. So it sounds like that was the last question.
I think
Yeah.
that might be, well, wait, I think there's another one that was earlier, I think maybe. Let's see, can you talk about how it's about the project-based requirement? Is that the same as, well, the question is, can you please talk about how that works with the project-based requirement? It sounds like general operating.
How that works. Maybe that person can unmute themselves.
That was Deirdre Shipstead?
Yeah,
Deirdre? Go ahead,
Yeah,
Deirdre. Maybe you can give us some context.
sure. No, when you went on the screen, you had a list of what the OGP grant covers. And then you proceeded to talk about how it's basically a capacity building grant, in the arena where the arts organization needs the most help. That's where the funding would go. That to me sounds like general operating, not project based. So I'm not understanding how those two relate.
Good question. So, or this funding is general operating support disguised as a 2-year grant.
So it's not project based.
It is it's got to be a project. So whatever your biggest need is, figure out how you would use this funding over 2 years to address that need. That's your project. And I'll go more into like project examples.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll go through that.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yes, I think there's some new questions.
Okay.
For 990 and OGP budget matching, since this is project-based, where on the 990 can we highlight that budget? So I think it's
whatever your so the project budget is separate from like what your annual organizational budget is on your 990 and your funder report. That's just your annual budget, right? Those are your numbers from the most recent fiscal year. The project budget is separate. We'll get into the project budget numbers. Does that make sense? I don't know if that person wants to. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think that was Jim Miller.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
And I
All
have
right.
I'm so sorry. I have one more question. From Regina Bailey. If you only have 2 years of SMU data arts, are you still eligible?
Yes. If your organization was founded 2 years ago, you don't have more than 2 years of data, then that's okay. But if your organization was founded 10 years ago, we need 3 years of data in that funder report. If we don't see 3 years of data in your founding year, which we do ask that in the application, if it says 2019, we're going to ask you to go back and finish that funder report. And actually, it could actually make the application ineligible due to it being incomplete at the time of application. So be real careful with that funder report. Make sure it's fully complete. Don't leave anything out. If you've got 3 years of programming, fill in those 3 years of data into that funder report.
Okay, Roz, and I've got a few more.
Okay.
Okay, our revenue dropped by about 90% during COVID and is now only recovering. How will budget size be determined? Is that pre-COVID revenue or revenue during COVID?
That question needs to be addressed at the end of the Q&A session. I'd need more information to be able to answer it.
Okay, and the last one, or the most, it's a question about what constitutes proof of board adoption of CEI statements.
Okay, so we'll get into it, but yeah, proof of board adoption is like meeting minutes. There may be a letter that the executive board signs off on that says when that was adopted. Maybe your bylaws get updated and you just give us a copy of your bylaws with that note of where the statement is in the bylaws. But yeah, we'll get more in detail into that. All right, should I move on?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Anne, and thanks, Julie. So budget categories. We do use budget categories. This is a way for us to understand where this funding is going, right? Most of the organizations applying to this grant are organizations with a budget under $1 million, right? So it's OGP 1 and 2 for the most part. OGP 4, so OGP 1 is organizations with budgets up to $200,000. OGP 2 is 200,000 to under $1 million. OGP 3 is $1 million to 15 million. OGP 4 is 15 million and up. In that OGP 4 category, we only have about 7 organizations. It's not very many. For the most part, it's 1 and 2. So it's important to know what budget category you fall under because it does affect your application requirements. It also affects the review criteria that the panelists who review your application will use to score the application. So we put that here on the screen so you can see it. Essentially, the larger the budget, the larger the request amount. The request amount is based on that most recent budget. We do, though, use a scale. So those applicants who are within a certain budget, they receive a larger proportion of their budget size. And then as the organization grows, the applicant is able to request a smaller and smaller percentage of that budget size. So again, most of our grantees are have budgets under $1 million. That's about 86% of our pool of grantees fall under the OGP 1 or 2 category. And yeah, the OGP, or the Organizational Grant Program, is meant to support those small and mid-sized organizations. That's what we're trying to do with this funding. And so that's why like the largest proportion of the money goes to those organizations to make sure we can sustain and support those organizations to thrive and continue to serve our county residents. All right, so the request for funding, what can you request? What is the number that you can use to propose a project, and how much can that project cost? What can I do? Like, how do I figure this out? We have a grant request calculator on our website. It's also in the application. I would suggest you figure it out before you go into the application, just to kind of think through what the project proposal could look like. So if you do want to do that and want to basically get an estimate of what you can request, you can go onto our website, www.lacountyarts.org/OGP grant request calculator. So you're going to, on that page, there's going to be a little box, and then next to it, a button that says calculate. So you'll put in the budget size from your funder report into that box. If you don't have that funder report ready, you could potentially, you can use the 990, the total revenue on your 990. But just know that if your funder report is completely different, like the budget size is different from that revenue line on your 990, we're using the funder report number, not the 990 number, okay? Either way, you'll use the budget size or the total revenue for the last fiscal year, pop it into this box and click calculate, and it'll give you your maximum grant request right underneath. Okay, that's a 2-year grant request. So this amount of money is what you will receive, like you are requesting to receive over 2 years. And so when you put your project budget together, you are stating how you're going to use not just this amount of money, but the dollar for dollar match that is required, right? So with this example, this request is for $40,000 something. The project cost would be more. It would be 80,000 plus, right? If there's a dollar for dollar match, maybe it's $80,000. If the match is more, it may be more, the full project cost. So just thinking through that. So you want to request 100% of that number. Don't split it in half, right? You are requesting the full amount that you see on the screen when you pop in your budget size and get the grant request amount. So you're requesting 100%, but when you receive the award, you will not receive 100%. No one will be able to receive 100%. There's 2 reasons. Number one, it's based on the score. So the request amount that you request, it's like the maximum, right, that you could ask for. That is reduced after you receive the score. And I'll go into this in full detail, but we'll reduce it down when we receive the score, right? So like, let's say you get an 80 on your application. So that's 80% of what the request amount was that you are allowed to request, right? And then depending on how many organizations are in the pool of grantees, there's another reduction because we don't have 100% to support everyone at their maximum. The last few years request amounts, when we sum them up, have been about $11 million in grant funding that is needed. The OGP budget is a $4.5 million budget. So for an example, last year, this year, when we sent out award notifications, folks received 42% of what they were allowed to request. So this tool is really to help you kind of figure out how much you can request, how much the match would be, and then to formulate a proposal that makes sense and that is scalable. Because if you don't receive 100% of that number, you'll need to find a matching source of funding or scale the project down. Either way, make sure you request 100% of that number. Okay. So the funder report, let's look at it. So this is a copy. The top part is a copy of what the first page of the funder report looks like, the header. That's where you're going to find the budget size for the most recent fiscal year. And so with that number, a percentage of that number is what the request amount will be. So it's a very important number. It's red on your OGP funder report because it's the first thing you're going to need before you start the application. Everything is based on this number. It's really important. And remember that it has to match your 990. So if this number is totally different from the total revenue line on your 990, something's wrong. You'll have to fix it. And it's either like an issue with like the year, maybe it's a different year. A lot of the times we get 2 different years. The funder report is for like 2021 and then the 990 is for 2022 or vice versa. Or something happened with the inputting of the data into the cultural data profiles. And if that's the case, then you can go to SMU Data Arts, which I'll go more in depth into, but you can talk to them and they can help you figure it out. They do have to match though, those numbers. They have to be either exactly the same or very close. So after you complete your financial and programmatic data in the profiles on SMU Data Arts, you'll download this funder report. You'll do that first. You'll attach it in the application. And then in the application, there's a question that says, what is your budget size for the most recent fiscal year? And this budget size is basically the total operating revenue minus any in-kind or cash endowment contributions. So that's how that number breaks down. And that's why it may be slightly different from your 990, but it shouldn't be completely different. Okay. So the cultural data profiles, let's talk through that. This is basically one of the things that's going to take the largest amount of time to apply to this grant, right? If it's your very first time, you're going to spend a lot of time in this website, and you're going to want to make sure that you have enough time. So you're going to want to get started really early on this cultural data profile piece. So that number one, you have the funder report ready to go, and then number two, you know what the request amount even is going to be. And so, yeah, in order to do that, you'll have to have some of your accounting will need to be updated to make sure it matches how the questions are asked in the cultural data profiles. And remember, you'll need 3 years of data in that profile. If it's your first time, it's going to take you a while to get those 3 years in there. If you're returning, you're just putting in the newest year and then downloading that funder report. So this database really is helpful for just kind of organizing yourself in terms of financial and programmatic information. It's good for advocacy. You can download reports from it, not just the funder report, but other types of analytical reports. Many foundations and government grant programs require that organizations provide a funder report from the Data Arts website. So it's really helpful for other grants that you may plan to seek out. And for those of you who've used the system in the past, there have been some changes to try to streamline and support organizations who have especially the small budget organizations under $50,000 per year. You'll see there's a lot of streamlining in the questions, and it's a reduced cultural data profile so that you're not spending a bunch of time putting in a lot of data that you may not have because it's such a small budget. Okay, so I'll stop here in case anything has been asked in the chat.
Hey, Ross, I feel like there are some very specific questions that we could probably hold on for Q&A. And do you know if there's any questions that we can ask now?
Yeah, there was one just clarifying just about, there's a question saying, are you saying that orgs in OGP 3 category receive a lower percentage of their requested amount than OGP 1 and 2?
No, so the difference is the request amount. The OGP 3 and 4 organizations receive a smaller proportion of their budget, or not receive, sorry. The request amount that's calculated, it's a smaller proportion of the budget. So this is before awards, right? This is how much you can actually request, right? So for an organization with a budget of $10,000, they can request almost, I think it's $10,000 as a grant. For those who have like a $300,000 budget, it's a smaller proportion of that budget size, right? The first one was 100%. Like you have a $10,000 budget, you're requesting 100% of that budget. $300,000 budgets, you're requesting a fraction of that. And then there's the reductions during award allocations. All right, anything else, Ann?
No, I think that's the only one for right now.
All right, awesome, thank you. And thank you for noting that there will be some Q&A questions at the end, Julie.
I'm sorry, I had a question. Is it too late to ask?
Go ahead.
Hi, I applied for the first time I'm the board president for San Gabriel Valley Coral Company, and I applied for the first time this past May for the recovery grant program. And ultimately we were denied, but we weren't given a reason. And we had to kind of reformulate our budget to approximate what we thought, would be appropriate. How do we get some insights about this for this next application to correct whatever we might have done incorrectly in that recovery grant? Because we spent a lot of time on it, and I understand there's a lot of applicants and a limited amount of funds, but not getting any feedback. It's hard to now go and spend more time on this new one without kind of getting some learnings from whatever shortfalls we had. If it was simply like there just wasn't enough money, but if we did something wrong, like what you were talking about, this funder report, threw up a red flag in my mind that maybe we hadn't stated our revenue correctly to match the 990, because our revenue would have been based on an optimistic go forward plan, which we would have thought would have been conservative. So yeah, sorry for the long-winded question, but
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid question. Unfortunately, I don't have any information about who was and wasn't funded under that Creative Recovery LA grant, and I don't have any feedback for you, right? So best bet will be to start your cultural data profiles. If you're noticing that your 990 information does not match those cultural data profiles, something needs to be fixed. There's a mismatch, or maybe maybe the years are different, maybe the amounts in the on the answers are incorrect. Something needs to be clarified. So lean on SMU Data Arts in that situation where you're seeing, okay, SMU Data Arts might have the cultural data profile, something needs to be fixed there. The SMU Data Arts team, they know that our applicants are applying during these 2 months, and they're ready to support you through fixing anything that may need to be fixed in the data arts profile so that it matches your 990. I don't know why you didn't meet I don't know if it was eligibility and that's why you didn't receive funding for creative recovery, or if it was an error on the application. You could potentially send an email to the general email address for that grant. Hopefully you have those guidelines. You can actually probably email them and say, hey, was this an eligibility problem, or did I make an error, and could you tell me where the error was? Okay, and then our third-party administrator, community partners, they will be the ones answering that question. So you can try that to see if you get any answers on that. But either way, for this process, it's a completely different process. You just want to make sure your funder report looks correct and then it matches the 990.
okay, thank you. That's great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, let's move on. Sorry. So for those of you who are new to this SMU Data Arts conversation, you've never been in that website before, you don't know what that whole thing is about, I would suggest you go onto their online orientation page. It's here on this top of the screen, the culturaldata.nonprofitsoapbox.com/calendar. You can find some online orientation workshops. They also have some recordings. We have some recordings on our website. I think it was in 2021. We co-hosted some workshops with them. So those are still on our website. You can also get started that way, and I'll show you the link to that one. But just remember, so you're submitting the data arts profiles, you're downloading the funder report, and you're attaching that funder report into this OGP application. And lean on the SMU Data Arts team. They're really helpful. They have a team of online folks that you can work with online and over the phone, and they'll help you get squared away. They understand our program really well, and we actually work really closely with them. Where they're seeing an error, they may ask us questions, we may ask them questions. So just, make sure you get in touch with them if you're seeing something that you feel like you need some support with. Okay, and yeah, and review our SMU Data Arts webpage, which may be helpful. Yeah. So this is what it looks like when you're submitting the funder report. You will see on our financials application task under the application, there is a button to upload the file for the funder report. You'll say what year, what end year that funder report says. And then you are able to provide any explanations. So these explanations would pertain to significant variances within the funder report, not the budget size, but that it needs to match the 990. If there's no match, there's an error you need to fix. But when they do match and you have just some line items that you think like there's some big dips and spikes between like 2 or 3 years, you may want to explain some of that so that the reviewers aren't wondering what happened in those years. And we know for a lot of this, it's going to be a pandemic related closure thing. But you still would want to kind of give an explanation so that they're not filling in or assuming things about the organization that may not be true. So always take a look at that funder report, note any dips or spikes that are significant, and provide some explanations for them under the OGP report explanations. So how do grants get calculated? We talked about this. The budget size is the number we're starting off with. The request amount is a proportion of that number. So we take a percentage of that, that's the request amount. We then multiply that request amount by the final score from the panel. And then from that number, we get a maximum grant request. Then we have to basically add everyone's maximum grant request, figure out how much we have in the how much we have in the request in general, and then how much we can actually give in terms of the award, so that everyone gets the same percentage. So you can see that in hard numbers here, right? So let's say your budget is a $200,000 budget. The request is like a $43,000 request, and the score ends up being like a really high score. You get a 98. So 98% times that request, you get a fundable request of $42,875. This will be reduced down. So in this example, the request ended up being less than $20,000 for 2 years. We had 237 grantees in this most recent year for 23-24 cycle, and each of them got 42% of their maximum request. So that number varies, right? If we have less than 237 grantees, you might see those, it might be more like a 45%, 47%, but this last year it was 42%. We are now at 465, it's 465 grantees in the OGP program. And so unfortunately, our program budget is not increasing as our grantee pool is increasing. And so we're advocating every year for an increase to that budget to ensure that it's sustainable, right? A lot of organizations depend on this money. A lot of staff salaries are paid through this funding. So we know the importance. And so just know that our Arts Commission is working really hard to try to advocate for a boost in that budget. But for now, we're working with $4.5 million, which is not enough. Okay, so we'll move on to project categories. Our application, we have both budget categories and then project categories that we use. The project categories are really just a way for us internally as staff to see or understand how the money is being used. So for OGP 1, 2, and 3 organizations, you can use any project category to frame your request. For OGP 4, the request has to be an accessibility request. Okay, and I'll go into detail. But just know there's 4 project categories. You have to choose one, and then your proposal should be shaped around that project category. Okay, so for sustainability, let's talk through these. So if your project category that you select is sustainability, and these are going to be requests that are supporting existing artistic and or administrative projects that help sustain the mission and goals of the organization. So, for example, these could be things like continued compensation and benefits for staff, ongoing costs of production, supplies, equipment, or rent, continuing support for marketing, governance, or fund development activities, continuation of artistic programming like payments to artists or production staff, or continuing IT efforts like computer upgrades, software, and website improvements, right? So these are existing projects that you want to continue to sustain. Organizational capacity, it's almost the same thing, except these are new projects. So let's say you're hiring a new administrative staff. You are creating a whole new website, or you're implementing a whole new accounting or box office or fund development app or software. Maybe you're implementing new plans or strategies around marketing, public relations, research, cultural equity and inclusion, strategic planning or development. These are new projects. This would be organizational capacity. And then artistic capacity. These are also new projects, but these projects would be to increase the artistic capacity of the organization. So this would be additional salaries or benefits for artistic staff, commissions of new work, increased rehearsal time for performing artists, exhibition costs, training opportunities for teaching artists, or new or increased employment for one or more of the positions that impacts the artistic product, like the technical director, lighting, or costume designer. And then we have accessibility. These are new or existing projects that provide public access to arts activities and programs. So these, for the most part, these are arts education activities for youth aged 5 to 18. In some cases, these might be audience development activities for specific segments of the population, low-income communities, people of color, LGBTQIA, and people with disabilities, or other communities who experience barriers to arts participation. Or they may just be activities that broaden, deepen, or diversify arts participation. A lot of times we have some large museums that provide free programming through this grant because they have these, they are able to do this through the accessibility project category. So before I go into the cultural equity and inclusion requirements, I'll wait and see if there's any questions.
I have some specific questions about people's organizations, but one question from Margaret was, what percentage of successfully completed applications are generally funded to some degree?
Oh, thank you for asking that. Over 90%. So if you complete this application, you've got all the requirements attached, you've done a pretty good job of writing this so that folks can understand what you're proposing, it makes sense, and you get a pretty good score. We do have score cutoffs, but for the most part, it's like over 90% of organizations who receive the funding. In 23-24, like it was almost 99%. I think it was 3 organizations who didn't get funding out of 240 who applied. So it's a high likelihood you will receive it's a lot to do. It's right. This application is tough. It's a lot to get through, but it's a high likelihood you will receive funding.
And one more question from Callie. Sorry, did you say that the artistic capacity was for new and existing projects?
Sorry. Yeah, I think in the slide it said new, but for artistic capacity, it's new or existing project.
Okay, new or existing. Okay.
Yeah.
Could I ask one other quick question about the categories you just went through?
Sure.
I was just curious, for this granting program, are any of those categories earmarked like for a specific, like 20% is going to go for artistic capacity, 20% is going to go for this? Is there any specific earmarking that we should be aware of when we're picking a category?
No, thank you for asking that. No, there's no earmarking. Those categories are really internal for us to be able to analyze how the funding is being used. There's no like amount of money attached to those.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. right, so we'll move on to cultural equity and inclusion requirements here. So before I get into this, just a little bit about the timeline on this. If you're a returning grantee, you're probably very familiar with this. For those that are new, I'll go into it. In 2015, the Board of Supervisors adopted a motion to create a framework for advancing cultural equity among the region's arts and culture sector. In 2016, the Department of Arts and Culture, back then we were the Arts Commission, the department began a journey through a public process with several town halls throughout the county. There was research involved, there was a literature review involved, there were stakeholder focus groups, an advisory committee was put together. And then in 2017, all of that information and all of that feedback was basically put into a report. And so it was released in 2017, and it was a report that summarized 13 recommendations that rose out of that process. And subsequently, that those recommendations were approved by the Board of Supervisors. They didn't all get funded. Of the 13, 5 were funded, right? But we have 13 recommendations. So in 2018, one of those that was funded was the requirement that any organization applying to the organizational grant program have to submit a statement, policy, or plan with the application. And so the funding was used to support the organizations to be able to put this together. And so we continue this, right? We're doing workshops every year for those who are new to this process, how to put a statement, policy, or plan together. We do have free workshops and work with a consultant to try to support organizations through this. So that began in 2018, and then in 2019, the department also started a process of putting a cultural policy together for the whole county, right? And then in 2020, the policy passed, as did a motion that was put forth by the Board of Supervisors to establish an anti-racist policy agenda after the tragic death of George Floyd, which is now the basis for the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative. Okay, so then in 2022, we now have a cultural policy that was approved with a strategic plan, and the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative is now a department. It's under the CEO's office. So we're implementing these goals, right? And the all departments of the county have a 10-year timeline to ensure that we can improve the educational outcomes, create better physical and mental health care outcomes, increase housing and housing stability, create meaningful employment opportunities, and an equitable and fair criminal justice system. So this is a 10-year project for the county that all departments are working on together. And so, yeah, so these last two pieces will hopefully provide a foundation for pushing our vision even further as we continue to strive to foster diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, and all that we do through a deeper commitment to reversing structural and systemic inequality in LA County. Okay, so that's the background on this cultural equity inclusion requirement. And so the way that this works out for those who are applying to this grant, you are providing these two pieces, the statement, policy, and or plan, depending on what your budget size is, and then the proof of the board adopting that, whatever that is, statement, policy, or plan. So you can read more about this in the guidelines. It tells you what the requirement is based on the budget. But just remember that you're addressing 5 key areas, right? So board of directors, staffing, audience, participants, programming, artists, creators. These are areas that we know are places where organizations can implement change in order to be able to have a more equitable LA County arts and cultural sector. So the goal here is that your documents should reflect the organizational thinking around how to achieve greater equity, inclusion, and or access, not just diversity, within either of these 5 key areas. For those who have a budget that is large, an OGP 3 or 4 organization, you're addressing all those areas, right? But for those who are smaller budget, you may only be addressing 1 or more of those, and that's fine. So just make sure you review the list of the minimum requirements. And then if you're not quite sure what we mean by statement, policy, plan, we have some definitions here, right? So the statement is a brief explanation of the why the organization is committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and the alignment of that commitment to the overall mission of the organization. So that's the why. The policy is the what. What are you doing in order to be able to bring that vision forward? So what's your commitment? What are you doing there to realize that statement? And then the plan is the how. How are you doing it? How are you measuring your progress on an annual basis, right? So you want to make sure you have a way to evaluate that progress. So again, we have some resources on our website that you can use to get started. You want to make sure you're discussing this with your board members and that you have all these documents ready to go before you even start the application so that you're just attaching it. If you still feel like you may need some more support, we do have 2 workshops happening, one today after this. After this workshop, it starts at 2 o'clock, I believe. We'll have a workshop hosted by the Aspire group. So if you're interested in joining, I don't know if it's still open, but if you are really interested in joining, you can try to see if you can join us for that. Otherwise, there's one more opportunity on the 12th of September. It's going to be the same workshop. And so you'll be able to kind of work with a coach to get a statement, policy, and plan created on behalf of your organization that you can then take to your board to get approved. So I'll stop here. I see some activity. And Julie, if there's anything that we should address now.
I have something for the end.
Okay, for the Q&A.
Yes.
What sort of documentation of proof of adoption of these statements are you looking for? The statement itself is clear. I'm still a little unclear though about how you want us to show that the board was adopted. Is that minutes? Is that a letter from the board?
It should be, if it's so it could be minutes. That I think that's what most folks have done because it's the easiest way of getting it completed. I don't know if your board is meeting in September. So it may be too late for some of you to be able to do it through meeting minutes. If that's the case, then you could potentially have them vote and put that vote into a letter. So the president or secretary would write a letter stating when they voted to adopt the statement, policy, or plan. And it would need to be signed by the president and secretary, a letter stating that it was adopted formally and when it was adopted. So you could do it, you could document it that way. And again, some folks just update their bylaws and then they just attach a new copy of the bylaws. So just be really careful because I know we've seen cases where folks have like a phone vote, like they're not going to meet in person, so they vote by phone or by email. But you have to make sure that your bylaws allow for that, and we will ask for a copy of your bylaws if you do end up providing like something like that, where you're just saying, hey, they voted and they approved it. We would need to see your bylaws to make sure that the board is allowed to vote and approve something without being in a meeting together.
I have a quick question just in regards to the workshop next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Will it be like this one or will you be touching on something else? This is from Callie.
The meeting next week at 11?
Yes, Tuesday at 11.
So that's another, it's a cultural equity and inclusion workshop, I believe is what she's referring to. It's going to be a repeat of what's happening today. So you don't have to attend both. You can attend one or the other.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to artistic samples. We have 14 disciplines that you're going to be selecting from, right? When you fill out your application, you're saying what your discipline is. And based on that discipline, in our guidelines, you'll see what type of artistic sample you can submit. So this could be potentially video. For the most part, we encourage video if you're allowed to submit that. In some cases, it might be a PowerPoint slideshow of images. Dance organizations are not allowed to submit just images. And I believe theater might be another one. So if you're in the performing arts, check the guidelines, make sure you submit the right type of samples. So images, video, it might be published materials. If you're in a literary arts organization, if you're a music organization, it might be audio up to 2 files, up to 5 minutes long, right? So edit your files down. Don't give us a 60-minute video. Edit it down, make sure they see what you want them to see. The panelists are reviewing between like 10 and 25 applications. So just remember that this is really the moment where you'll be able to show off to them, right? They're looking at your narrative, they're looking at your financials, they're looking at your funder report. And so this is the moment where you can show them like what it's like to be part of the programming, why it's unique, why it is of high quality, and why it deserves to be funded. So pay really careful attention to what you submit. I would say if you have the ability to submit 2, you're required to submit at least 1, but we highly encourage you to submit 2 if possible. Try to capture their attention with these samples, and know that they won't be watching the whole thing. Of the 5 minutes, they may watch the first 2 or 3. So try to capture their attention. Use the description. You are allowed to describe what the sample is. Use that to entice them to want to watch more, right? And make sure that you credit, you're giving credit. If you're in your artistic samples showing a body of work of an artist, like make sure you give the credit to those artists whose work you are showing in your photographs or in your video. All right, so, oh, and I see a hand raised. Rachel, do you want to unmute yourself?
The question was answered. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to ask you to lower your hand. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so let's watch some samples. Bear with me as I get these up and running. Okay, so first sample that we have, so these are just to kind of give you an idea of what folks have used as an artistic sample. So the first one is from Las Vueltas project. They describe this as a mini documentary. It's called Age of Change. And so in this documentary, the organization celebrates their 10-year anniversary, showcasing some of the students, mentors, teaching artists, and parents who have participated in the programming and the impact that it has had on their lives and how it's empowered those community members to use their voice and their creativity.
We don't see it, Ross.
Yeah, just a second. It's going to
Okay.
take me a quick sec. Thank you. Right, there we go. All right. So let's see. So that sample, I think it's a good one because it shows you a variety of images with the voices of the youth and mentors who are part of the program. It provides you with some insight into how they do what they do and the impact it's had on their participants.
Sorry,
Okay.
Russ, I don't think we've seen it. It didn't show up.
Oh, you didn't see the,
No, we didn't.
okay, we will send you a link to this.
Okay.
You heard it,
Thank
but you
you.
didn't see it?
We could not see it now.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, we'll just send you a link to this later.
Okay.
I'm not sure why that didn't work. Okay, so I'm going to show you the second sample now. Hopefully this works. So if this doesn't work, let me know. Send me a chat. Or feel free to unmute yourself.
We can see it.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie.
Looking for a place to move? Consider downtown LA. Downtown Skid Row neighborhood is a resource for the entire region. It's a community that has taken on the most difficult problems and done so most joyously.
No intercourse? Is that what you said?
There is no intercourse at all. Everyone should be sleeping. And if you have to use the toilet or anything like that, you have to go before 10 o'clock. And if not, we're putting you out.
What if I had to pee after 10 o'clock at night?
Well, the security guard will escort you around to the bathroom. Urinate as much as you possibly can. Don't drink no water after 7 o'clock. And then you might not have a problem.
We'll take it. Come on.
Comments?
Me?
Yes.
I can tell you myself, as a man who's been around a very long time, I gotta pee after 10 o'clock. And it doesn't sound very compassionate to me, someone saying, you can't pee after 10 o'clock. You have to have a security guard walk you to the bathroom and watch you pee? He's gonna get pretty tired after the 5th or 6th time. Think about it. He's getting minimum wage. And he thought he could just come to work, sit in a chair, and sleep the whole damn night. Well, forget about it, because I got to pee.
Okay, so hopefully you saw and heard that one.
Yes, we did. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Okay, so that was Los Angeles Poverty Department. They're a multidisciplinary performing arts organization led by artists and activists. John Malpede. They're comprised principally of people housed and unhoused who live and work in Skid Row. So that piece was called The New Compassionate Downtown. It was an excerpt. And it was presented at the Geffen Contemporary at the Mocha Plaza for a live audience, commissioned by the Mocha for the We Rise 2021 festival. It was performed at the Mocha Performance Space. So the reason I showed this one was that I think it does a good job of drawing in the viewer. It captures your attention right away. And also it lets you see a little bit of the audience, right? You see some engagement. The quality of the piece is great. It's a nice, in terms of audio and visual, it's a good quality sample. And it makes you want to go watch one of their shows, right? After you watch this, you're like, oh, this is interesting. So yeah, so do your best. You know, everyone has their own capacity. Not everyone will be able to produce a really professional looking piece like this. But, you know, do your best to like try to get your panelists to be engaged in the work that you're showing them and to want to come to your exhibit or show or production. or maybe for the arts education organizations, you want to show them the teaching and learning happening, the quality of the teaching artists that you hire, how they're engaging with the students that they're working with. Okay. So any questions on this?
Yeah, there's one. Let's see. Does LA County have an estimated amount of time this grant requires to prepare?
No, there's no way for us to estimate it because everyone is different. For some, I mean, the cultural data profiles can take several days, right? And that's the biggest piece. And then once you have these attachments and pieces ready to go, then you're just plugging them into the online portal. So I'll show you the online portal, but it's hard to say how many hours it would take you without knowing the context, like how many folks are working on it. How are you starting from scratch, or are you just kind of returning to this? I would say, I mean, if it's your first time going to those data profiles, that I would minimum give yourself, a week to finish that. And then, with the cultural equity and inclusion stuff, depending on when your boards are meeting, how you get them together to vote on that statement, policy, or plan, it can be a lengthy process. Any other questions?
One more from Margaret. She's asking if our board of directors meet through emails and Zoom calls, does that qualify as meeting of the grant?
As long as the bylaws allow for this to be adopted in that way. If your bylaws say that your board members can vote and approve something and adopt it over email or over phone, that's fine. You'll also have to submit the bylaws and highlight where in your bylaws it says they can adopt a policy that way.
That's all for now.
All right, great. Julie, do you see my PowerPoint right now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's move on to for arts education projects. We will briefly touch on what you're going to need to kind of put together for the arts education projects. So how will you know if you're an arts education project? So if your programming that you are supporting through this grant is mainly going to serve 5 to 18-year-olds, even if you're asking for staff salary, your request is for a staff salary. If the programming that staff person is working on is going to serve 5 to 18-year-olds, it's an arts education project. Okay, so we have really strict guidelines around the arts education projects. Those are reviewed by arts educators, so they'll be in an arts education panel. And so we have some notes, right, for folks who are in those arts ed categories for you to kind of figure out what type of programming you're doing and then what the requirement is. So read the guidelines. I'm just going to briefly touch on this. So the in-school programming, if you're an arts education program that does in-school programming, right? Who are those organizations? Those are going to be organizations who deliver services as part of a child's regular school day, in or out of school campus. If it's an in-school experience or off-site experience in partnership with the school, a museum, maybe it's an artist residency, a field trip, or presentations during the school day, those would be in-school programming. Out-of-school programming are services provided in partnership with a school intended for enrollees of a prospective school, but maybe not during the school day. So if you're not doing it during the school day, but it's in partnership with a school, that's out-of-school programming. And then we have community-based programming, which are the services that are provided to children or youth and are or their families that are outside of school property and not in partnership with any particular educational institution, there'll be some additional requirements depending on which definition is most aligned with your project or program. So if this sounds like you, or it sounds like your organization, one of the things you're going to need to do is make sure that you answer all of the arts education questions in the application. And then you're going to want to make sure that you provide a curriculum sample or some type of lesson plan that shows how the programming is put together. You're going to want to talk about the qualifications of the team that you're working with. And also what the learning objectives are and how they align with the California, the state of California Visual and Performing Arts Content Standards. If you're not familiar with those, there's a link to this in our guidelines. You can check those out. There are several sections that have to do with artistic perception, creative expression, historical and cultural context, aesthetic valuing, connections, relationships. So look through it, see where your programming aligns with these content standards and kind of discuss how you put the programming together, how your programming is culturally relevant or responsive to the needs of the particular students you're working with or participants that you're working with. And if you're doing community arts programming, so you're not in school or out of school, it's community-based, then you may not need to submit a curriculum sample, but you do want to answer all the arts education questions. If you have a sample, definitely submit it. And just make sure that that if your sample is an arts, if it looks like an arts education sample, like let's say you said we are a theater organization in your discipline, but then we see your samples and it's a sample of like a youth program, we're going to label it as an arts education program or project, right? So just make sure you choose the right discipline and that your arts education task is complete and that you submit any attachments you need to submit if you're mainly serving youth 5 to 18 with your programs. All right, I'll stop there. Anything in the chat?
There's a question by Rose Mayer. Rose, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I'm just trying to clarify if my program is arts education for adults, we don't serve any youth. Would we still need to answer the arts education plan questions and provide the lesson plans?
No, it's only if you're mainly serving youth 5 to 18.
Okay, thank you.
And then I had two questions. One from Andrew, would like to know if you can share the full application of a successful grantee, maybe LA Poverty Department.
Send us an email. And
okay.
we'd have to see how we would do that.
Okay. And then Robin would like to know if there's any way these links can be placed in the chat since the slides are not clickable links.
Yes, we're going to send this PowerPoint to you as a PDF, and the PDF will have clickable links.
Thank you.
Sure. No problem. Thank you. Okay, so now's the moment to take a deep breath because I know we went through quite a lot of information. Maybe you have a question that we didn't answer before that you think is relevant that you may want to ask now. Feel free to raise your hand. Okay, Mercedes, I see your hand. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I did ask a question about the budget versus the 990.
Okay.
If we are providing projected budget for the period of this grant, this 2-year grant, it's not going to match a 990 because the 990 is after the fact.
Okay,
So
so
how
you're talking about
do
two
we
different.
reconcile?
When we're talking about 990 matching, we're talking about your funder report, your most recently completed fiscal year organizational budget.
Got it.
Okay, and then the project
Thank you.
stuff is different.
Thank you.
All right, and I see Rachel. Rachel, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have a question because we have a relatively small budget that we completed for the year 22-23 because our fiscal year ends September the 1st. But we received a grant award that came in just this month. So that monies will technically be in our last year's budget, which makes our budget look really upside down. It looks like we've made all kinds of money in that particular year. How do we address that? Is that through the OGP funder report where we explain that? Because we don't want to look like we're in a business of trying to make money.
Yeah, it would be under the funder report explanations. You would explain that would be a big spike that you would want the panelists who are reviewing to understand why there's such a large jump there.
Right, because that money is technically is going to be used for the upcoming season, not the previous season.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I saw somebody named Aisha.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, I'm driving, so that's why my video is not on. My question is about the arts education. So we are an arts education organization, and we provide arts programming into school sites that do not have an art hour, which means we don't align to VAPA standards. We align to core curriculum standards because we integrate all of our classes into their core classes. So, for example, our mural class is the art of math, and they learn math through art. How would we denote, how would I mark that on our application?
Yeah, so if you don't align with VAPA standards, but you have a different set of standards that you're working with, you can kind of just say that in the application. It's okay if it's not specifically VAPA. I'm sure there will be some alignment with VAPA, even if it's not the same subject. But I think just like helping the panelists to understand, like, you are fulfilling the goals of like that particular classroom by aligning yourself with whatever they're learning in that portion of their lesson. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, I'm just going to keep going down the list. Stephen Turk.
Yes, good question on the budget size. So we have a June fiscal year. The last fiscal year for which we filed a 990 would be June 30th, 2022. And because of COVID, our revenue then was about $50,000. Going back 2 years, when we did our application 2 years ago, we were using our 2020 Form 990 when our revenue was about $425,000. So am I right in thinking that because of COVID, our budget size is dramatically reduced, and therefore the allowable, the amount we can apply for grants is a fraction of what it would have been 2 years ago? There's no methodology to adjust for the fact that COVID impacted the numbers that are being used to measure the budget size.
Unfortunately, we don't have like a different way of doing it. It's based on whatever the most recent budget size is. So if there's any way to get your 2023 numbers in and use your 23 numbers, I would try to do that.
Yeah, probably not, since they're not due with the IRS until mid-November.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have another way of doing it. We don't like have an average or anything like that. It's strictly based on the budget size in the funder report.
So that's a 1 year number, and we're stuck with it this year, and hopefully 2 years from now it bounces back. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, or you could skip this year. If you think that it's not worth it to have a tiny little award amount for 2 years and you want to skip and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to apply with my 23 numbers next year because my award will be significantly different, you can also do that. It's risky, right? It's not everybody would want to do that, but that is another option
Okay.
because we do open it every year.
I'll do the calculation and see how that works out, because obviously we'll get a higher percentage of our revenue for the much lower revenue number.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Stephen. No problem. All right, Brandon?
Yeah, actually, my question was kind of related to that. I was just going to ask, when you talk about the amount that we're eligible for applying, the maximum amount we're eligible to apply for as being part of our most recent budget, is that our most recent filed budget or our current year budget?
The filed one. The one that you're
Okay.
showing on your 990 that has to match your funder report.
Okay, because I was going to say we're in kind of an opposite situation. Like, we're a newer organization that's been like growing pretty radically, and like this year, our fiscal year actually ends in January, so we'll pretty much know exactly what this year is going to look like. Is there a way for us to show like this bigger budget that we're completing this year compared to last year, the last filed budget, which would have been significantly smaller?
What do you mean? Is there any way to show? Are you saying like adding on another 6 months to your funder report, or?
Yeah, I was just curious if the eligibility was going to be like 100% tied to that filed report, even though like this year our budget is significantly larger.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it does have to do with like, so your 990 has to match your number on your funder report. So like, I know I've seen this happen where somebody will give us the funder report for the more current year.
Right.
But when the 990 is reviewed and it's compared and it doesn't match, that then becomes a problem. So then we have to go back to them and say, hey, give us your funder report for the prior year so that it matches your 990. Because it has to be a match. So yeah, we wouldn't be able to use like a more current set of numbers if the 990 doesn't match it. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wasn't sure, since the projects we'd be applying for, if we should be sort of thinking of that in terms of what our current budget is, but it sounds like it's tied to whatever our last filed budget was. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
No problem. Holly Tiempo? Or
Hi. Yes. So the organization that I'm with, Inglewood Open Studios, started as a grassroots in 2006 and commenced programming at that time, but we didn't become a nonprofit until 2021. So I'm wondering, with I think it was the 3 years for the CDP, should we show 2 years that under which we were a nonprofit, or should we show 3?
I guess it's kind of flexible for you, because if your founding year is 2021, then officially that's when you started doing business as a 501c3, then you could use just the 2 years. But if you feel like you want to show the full like spectrum of like those last 3 years, if you think there's anything positive that could come out of folks seeing like what happened over these 3 years, you may want to submit that third year, but it's kind of up to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then Rachel, I don't know if that's just your hand still up from before. Okay, it sounds like maybe that was just a hand that was still up. Victoria Kraus?
Yeah, hi. I put a question in the chat, but I just wanted to double check to see if it would, and I'm sorry if I'm late, if you already answered this, but the OGP and the CIAG grants are both due on the 4th of October. Can we apply for both of them, or is it one or the other?
It's one or the other. So if you're eligible for OGP, you wouldn't be eligible for the other one, and vice versa. OGP is specific to organizations whose mission is related to arts production, programming, advocacy. CIAG are organizations who are not, their mission is not an arts mission, but they do some arts programming to advance their mission. And so we'll look at the budgets, right? So if your budget is 50% or more being used for arts activities and programming, your OGP. If it's less, then you're a CIAG grant applicant.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so I think I got everybody's question answered. We will have Q&A though, so feel free to wait for the Q&A if you have more questions. I want to make sure I get through the rest of this.
Okay.
Oh, Julie, did you want to say something?
No, just a quick question. Andrew had a question, but also Victoria wanted to know, can they apply for OGP and CAIG grants?
Oh yeah, we just answered that one.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on. So the grant portal, this is what I'm just going to give you an overview of the grant portal. If you need to log out, feel free to do that. This is really just, we're going through what does the grant portal look like? How do I get in there? How do I submit this stuff? The meaty stuff we've gone through, right? These are just now like, what are the steps? What are the buttons I click? Okay, so to get into this grant portal, you're going to go to the URL www.apply-lacdac.smapply.io. Okay. If it's your very first time, you're going to register to have an account. If it's you're continuing, you're going to use your prior passwords, right? So hopefully, if you're new to this, but you know you've applied before, find your old passwords. Hopefully that last person that submitted the grant has filed them for you, kept them in a place where they're accessible for you. If you're like, I have no idea what the password is, no one gave it to me, I know we're returning, email us and we'll help you get in there, okay? Point is, don't start a new account if you've already applied in the past. We don't want you to have 2 accounts for the same organization. All right. Starting your account, you're going to submit all the general information, your legal name, your FEIN number, DUNS number, your address information, what type of organization you are. Some tips, if you can start from a Word document and just copy and paste the answers to the questions, that's the best way to go about this, so that if for whatever reason something glitches, you don't lose all your work. It's been known to happen on these grant portals. Sometimes they glitch, especially at the very last, on the very last day. For some reason, there's a lot of activity and sometimes they can be glitchy. So we don't want you to go through that. Try to submit it early on, at least 5 days prior. Keep your username and password readily accessible. If you do receive the grant, you'll need to get back in here to submit reports. All right, and then again, call us if you need help troubleshooting. We're available, okay? So once you're in, you've got your eligibility profile, your user setup, it's all completed. You'll then be able to see the application if you meet our eligibility requirements. There is a questionnaire. It'll only show you the application if you answer the questions correctly in the eligibility profile. You click start on the application. Remember, you don't have to submit all of this all at once. You can save and continue later. So there's a set of tasks. Tasks is another way of saying form, or form of the application. So you'll have different tasks that you'll complete. You'll be able to see your progress as you're going through it. Every time you submit one or complete one, it'll say that you've completed that task, and then you can continue on. When you're done with all of it, you'll get a green submit button. And so then you'll be able to click the green submit button. So that's what you're seeing here on the screen. So this is the list of the 15 tasks. Note that 3.1, cultural equity and inclusion statement, policy, or plan, that will not be shared with panelists. So when you submit your statement, policy, or plan, there will be an internal review, we'll make sure it's attached, but we won't be showing that to the panelists, okay? So you'll want to talk about the process of putting that together in your application. All right, some quick tips on the narrative questions. Again, starting from a Word document, starting early, connecting the dots for these panelists who are reviewing these applications. Tell them the story of the organization, the evolution, where you were at the beginning, where you're at now, where you're trying to go. What are your long-term goals? How are they connected to your mission? Avoid hyperbole where possible. Yeah, we don't want to say like we're the most amazing dance company in Los Angeles. Like, show them that, right? Show them that in the samples, like help them understand why you are the best, right? You don't want to use a lot of hyperbole, because then that becomes like a red flag, and then they're like looking for something to mark as like, not in alignment. So you want to make it easy for them to read through it, be impressed by your samples, right? Use outline format or possible bullet points. Keep in mind that they are basing their score on the application and not what they are assuming about the organization. So you don't want to leave any chance of them having to fill in the blanks for whatever reason. Try not to use marketing information. I think it's more, you want to talk about the project narrative, how you do what you do, how you will be putting this 2-year project together, who's involved, how it will change from year 1 to year 2, right? It's a 2-year project. How will you change? How will this project evolve from year 1 to year 2? How you're evaluating it. And make sure you proofread it. A lot of times, totally understandable. We see people do copy and paste because it's a general operating support grant. You're copying and pasting maybe from the last application. Totally fine to do that, but proofread it. You don't want your grant cycle, like the year, to be in the wrong cycle, right? Like, you don't want to send us a project that is discussing things that will happen in 2022, because it will be in the wrong cycle, and that's a huge red flag. So make sure you proofread it, and then if you can have somebody read through it before you submit it, that would be great. So you're going to submit your mission, your history and programming, your planning and leadership information, your community and core audience information, your artistic engagement and quality information. OGP 1 can use the organizational narrative to provide their project proposal information. But make sure you put it in there, right? Don't just skip the questions on the project plan. You want to actually like submit that information under organizational narrative, so that, again, the panelists aren't wondering like, well, what is this money being used for? You can see a sample of the application on our website. There'll be a link to it on the PowerPoint when you receive it. And then remember, for the community and core audience question, you want to be really specific, provide some demographic data, some economic, cultural characteristics of the audiences and participants you serve. Describe how the applicant addresses and is taking steps to integrate and reflect the values of cultural equity and inclusion, both internally and externally. All right, and then if you're a new applier, make sure you're articulating your commitment to cultural equity and how you're addressing this in your engagement with your community and audience. Any new outreach programs, any free admission programs, scholarship programs, how have you addressed the needs of the audiences that you're trying to reach? Anything like that you're using, any strategies, talk about them, highlight them. We don't want to just see like, oh, we have this number of people of color on our board, this number of people of color in our audiences. We actually want, we want the panelists to be able to see like what you're doing, how you thoughtfully thought through cultural equity and inclusion, both around audience development, but also like within the leadership, within the way that you're putting programming together. So make sure you're thinking through all of that. Okay. So now I'll show you the budgets. We've made it really easy this year. We've made some updates, okay? Last year, we made some updates to the project revenue budget. So you are now, you don't need to submit like every line item that you'll be using to match your revenue, right? You can just tell us, okay, we're gonna have this amount of matching revenue. It has to be equal to or more than the request amount, right? Because there's a dollar for dollar match. And then you're just telling us, where is that money coming from? So you can explain that in the box under matching revenue explanations. And then we also made some updates to the expense table. In prior years, you had to show line by line how much you would be spending on each of these line items. So we've kind of updated this. It's now what proportion of the money each year will go to these different items, right? So these are percentages, but you don't need to put the percent sign in it. Just put the number in. So if 100% of your funding is going to be used for salaries, it's just 100 and 100, right? Year one, year two, 100% of it is used for salaries. Provide short notes where you're thinking it might be helpful. And then you can also explain these numbers, right? Make sure you explain anything that has to do with other expenses. We have a line item that says other. You want to make sure you're explaining what that other is. And then again, you have that project budget expense explanations box. Make sure you're saving as you're going through this so you don't lose your work. It's recommended that compensation fees, commissions, honoraria paid to artists and or teaching artists is explained in further detail, if possible. Provide that context for your project budget. Let the panelists know what you need to pay for and how. Make sure to show how it aligns with the narrative, the project proposal. All right, and then let's talk about the review criteria. So we have the 5 areas of review criteria, right? So we have criterion 1, which is artistic quality, criterion 2, which is management capacity or organizational readiness or managerial excellence, depending on your budget size. Criterion 3, quality of project plan. Criterion 4, quality of project evaluation. And then criterion 5, response to community need or relationship with community or defined address community need. So you see how the points break down here. It's a maximum of 100 points that you can receive on this grant. The review criteria language is in the guidelines. So you can actually see what the panelists will be looking for in the application to score. So take a look at that, it's helpful. And then remember that your panelists are your peers. It's a peer panel. They have a sense of what high quality work looks like, feels like, sounds like, what it takes to put this programming together to achieve that level of work, both administratively and artistically. So help them understand how you do what you do. Be very specific, but make sure it's not a repetition of information, right? You want to make sure that you're answering those questions. There's sub questions to help guide you. So those are there to kind of support you and making sure that the information you want to make sure is in there is there. Okay. So pro tips, read the guidelines, keep your passwords and your notes accessible for the next person. It's possible you may, a lot of times we've seen folks have left an organization, gone to a different organization, and then the new person doesn't know where the passwords are to get into the grant portal to like report out on the grant. So make sure that you keep that stuff organized, that it's accessible just in case, or, you may go on, a leave, family leave, whatever it is, so that somebody else can continue on with the work. And then download your submitted application. You'll want to make sure you have that if you receive the award so that you can see what you applied for and you can submit your reports based on that application. The application is due on October 4th by 11:59 p.m. PST. The panels will happen in February and March, and you will receive notification in July of 2024. And unfortunately, there's no extensions. So just be really careful with your time. There's no extensions. We don't do that. There's just too many organizations for us to be able to provide any grace period. So just make sure you have this in by that deadline, if not a little bit earlier. And then if you are thinking that you may want to be a reviewer, and you're not applying this year, maybe you're considering applying, but you're thinking, hey, you know what, I'm not going to be able to apply this year, maybe following year, you can actually nominate yourself to be a panelist. So consider that. It's a good way to get some background to see how it happens, how the decisions are made, how the discussion happens with the peer panel review. And And know that these panelists are all artists, arts professionals, community members, folks with a wide array of knowledge and professional qualifications in the arts with familiarity in the Los Angeles region art sector. Again, high percentage of folks, over 90%, receive the funding. And if you don't receive the funding, we will provide panel feedback. So we'll give you a summary of the notes from the panelists to support you if you consider applying again. Okay, and that's it for the workshop. Thank you for joining us and for staying on. And we can do a Q&A now. So if there's questions that didn't get answered that you want to check in with us about, we can do that. We have about 35 minutes for a
I
Q&A.
have one.
Okay, go for it.
Let's see. Andrew was asking about, first of all, panelists. How are they selected? Can we see some previous lists of past panelists? And he also wanted to know, how is a functioning board of directors defined? Anything besides meeting regularly?
So for the first question, panelists are selected. So we have a nomination link. We have it on our website. We request, we basically send out an email to all of our grantees who are not applying in the year that we're reviewing to nominate themselves. So a lot of times these applications are reviewed by grantees. Other than that, we do a lot of research. Our staff are out there. We're trying to make sure that we are out in the field meeting people, getting to know folks that are working, that are folks either working in the field or maybe in research or funders, folks that are sometimes community members. A lot of times we'll ask interns who are participating in our arts internship program. To be a panelist, you can, again, if you're not being reviewed this year, you can submit a nomination to review. We don't like publicly send out who the panelists are out, like we don't blast it out or anything. We try to keep it anonymous so that the panelists feel safe to be able to score these applications, because these are peer reviewed, right? We don't want any friction. So we try to keep it anonymous. And so when we do have our panels, we ask that participants in the panels don't share that information that they've reviewed, that they've been part of the review process, until after awards are out. So yeah, we don't have like a public list. We have like an internal list that we use to make like basically emails and calls out to folks. And we do need we invite about 100 people each year so that we have a panel of at least 75. So if you know anyone, please, if you think they're a good match for this type of a thing, please feel free to reach out to us. We can send you the nomination link. You can also just find it on our website. And then there was another question about, sorry, Julie, what was the second question?
Perhaps Andrew would like to ask the question.
Yeah, sure, I'm happy. I just wanted to know how the functioning board of directors was defined.
Oh, yes, sorry. The board of directors, we don't have another, as long as they're meeting, right? There is a group of folks that is in charge of the governance of the organization that are meeting, right? We don't have a number of meetings that have to happen during the year. As long as they're meeting and then they're functioning and they're in contact. I think there are
well I guess my question is about the definition of functioning.
Yeah, so there are state requirements around how a board functions. So I would look up those California state requirements.
Okay, and if we're continually approved for the nonprofit, I assume that we're meeting those qualifications?
I don't know what you mean by continually approved for the nonprofit. Do you mean like your IRS requirements? Yeah, if you have 501c3 status,
yeah,
you are probably meeting those requirements.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay.
That's all.
I have a couple of other questions. I believe Brandon Roll had the same question. Brandon, was your question answered? Okay. And then I have a question from Lauren.
Okay.
The project-based and operating fund distinctions has never been clear. Operations as a project, question mark.
Do you want to unmute yourself? Who was the person that asked that?
That is Lauren. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce your last name. Lauren D. Who seems to be gone. Okay.
Yeah, and I think we answered that question, so I think we can skip to the next one.
Okay, I feel that one was answered. Margaret Mendenhall. You had a
Is there a
question?
way to still register for the 2 p.m. class today? Email Ann Jensen. Ann is on the line right now. Oh, I think she answered your question. She said you should still be able to RSVP, so hopefully you did that.
Actually,
Yes.
it's an earlier question.
Yes, it was an earlier question.
Oh.
I apologize. I can't get my raised hand thing to work on this for some reason.
Okay.
But what I wanted to find out, our organization, and actually it does say NTEE as a theater, arts, we identify as arts-based, but we also are, what we do overlaps with social services. Some of the things they offer there, would we be eligible for this? And 50% of our budget does go to arts.
If your budget, if 50% or more of your budget is used for arts programming, then you're eligible. You should be eligible as long as you meet the other requirements.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it was just because we're kind of on the borderline because of what because we do theater classes for neurodiverse individuals.
Yeah, we have organizations. We have a visual arts organization who does similar work there, and they are considered an OGP grantee. There is a gray area, right? Because a lot of times you're doing like intersectional work, which you potentially could be also eligible for CIEG, but that's why we use the budget to just make sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for all the work you do. And hopefully you're able to submit an application this year.
And I have one more from Rose Mayer.
Okay.
Rose, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to ask, because this is actually the first ever grant that my organization is applying for. So I just wanted to ask if you have what would be your most helpful tip for a first time applicant?
Oh, okay. So I would say starting early is probably my most helpful tip. You can't start early enough, especially with this one. This one, there's just a lot of different pieces to this application. So the earlier you start, the better. If you can get somebody to support you or work with you, you can collaborate on this grant portal. So if there is a way to get a collaborator to work with you so that you can kind of chop things up and not have to do everything all at the same time, that also might be helpful. And then with your narrative, I think a lot of times people get tripped up with the narrative because, again, it is general operating support, and the way you're proposing it has to be a 2-year project. So I think sometimes folks think like they have to have like a new thing that they're supporting, but it doesn't have to be a new thing. So that's something that I always try to help people understand. Like this can be like you're paying your administrator, your small budget organization that works with volunteers, right? Like pay the person that's doing a bunch of the work. So frame it as a 2-year project, right? You have goals for those 2 years. You're starting here. You have milestones you want to hit. And so that can be your 2-year project. But it doesn't have to be something brand new. So don't get too tripped up on like, oh, what is the project category? The project category is like whatever best matches whatever you need the funding for. And then I think just in the narrative being very succinct so that the panelists the reviewers are reviewing a lot of information. So you want to get them what they're looking for easily, quickly. They can see it. They can, bullet point is great because they can just kind of briefly see like, okay, this is the answer to this question. This is how they're breaking it down. They really just want to make sure that there is the folks that are working on this are going to be able to pull this through, that there's somebody responsible at the organization that really cares and is helping the organization to succeed. So a lot of times, like the narrative can be meh, but if the sample is really great, it can brighten, it can really boost your score. So yeah, be really succinct in your narrative, but make sure your samples are a good demonstration of the quality of the work that's happening.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Sorry, and I know that was more than one, but hopefully that's helpful.
No, that was great. I appreciate it.
That's all I have.
All right. Okay, just double checking if there's anything else, or if anybody wants to unmute. Oh, Parker, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, there we go. The two quickie questions. One is, are there any penalties for contacting a review panelist once our application has been submitted?
So like, let's say you submit the application and you accidentally missed something. There was an error somewhere. Normally we will contact you so that you can fix it. But that would be, you wouldn't be able to correct anything in the narrative or add anything new. You can replace things. So for example, like your funder report wasn't the same year as your 990, then we would say, hey, give us the newer funder report or give us your other 990 so that they match and it's the same. So there is that will happen probably in November, because there is an internal review that the staff will do to make sure everything is complete and that everything's ready to go to the panelists. We won't deduct points. The internal staff reviews are just to get you over the finish line. The panelists will then be scoring. And so that's not done by staff. The panelists will be using the review criteria to score.
Okay, thank you. Because in some procurement thing, if you contact the reviewers after this application is submitted, then your application is automatically denied because you're trying
yeah,
to
I know.
rush
With
it.
RFQs, it's really strict, but no, not with this one. Yeah, we'll be in contact with you if there's anything that looks like it needs to be fixed.
Okay, and related to the project issue, we're a community chorus, and what we're probably looking for is support for paying for good orchestras for our concerts. Is that kind of in the mix for consideration as a project?
Yeah, that's a large percentage of our grantees. That's what they are using the funding for, to support artists' fees, to support commissions of new work. Yeah, that's totally in line with what OGP is all about.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. All right, anybody else? A message down here. Oh, thank you, Regina. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If there's nothing else, feel free to log out. We'll be around, so if anything, you can come back if you remember something. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. And we're available by email, so email us if anything. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Are we now into office hours?
This is office, yeah, we're in office hours right now.
Oh, okay. I'm with the Claremont Corral, and we had grants for several years running, and then about 2016, we didn't, and then COVID hit. I set up an account. Will that be a big deal if, because I didn't have the old password and stuff?
Oh, no, it's okay. We can actually, there's something we can do in the back end of the grant portal. We can, basically the way it happens is because there's collaborators, we can make you a collaborator with the old account and then merge you together. So
Oh,
there's that
okay.
possibility if you want to see the old information.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. It's a great question. Oh, and thank you, Daniel, for I saw your chat message about the sample that wasn't playing. Unfortunately, I saw it too late. But we'll share that out with you, the PowerPoint, after this workshop. Oh, I see something in the chat. Oh, thank you. All right, I think sounds like everybody got their questions answered. So there's nothing else. I'm gonna log out here. Again, email us if something pops up that we didn't answer and you want to connect. And yeah, good luck with your applications, everyone. Take care.